So I have to share with y'all, I love the movie Frozen. We have two young daughters, a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, and the movie has played in the Canada household literally hundreds of times. I also have to tell you, though I've seen it hundreds of times, I didn't actually watch it until just a few weeks ago, like where I actually sat down and watched it from beginning to end with some intentionality. And it is a great movie. It is artistically stunning. The music is fun and catchy. And the storyline is really compelling. It's actually one that I can relate to, and perhaps many of you relate with this film. You see, there's these different characters, and they're all on a journey, and they each experience these very real external and internal conflicts. Remember? Elsa, she has this condition, these icy powers, and this condition creates all sorts of fear and isolation. And her sister Anna is actually really affected by Elsa's condition. All she wants in the world is just to experience the feeling of being loved. And then you have Kristoff, who Anna later falls in love with. And Kristoff is this big, burly type guy, an Iceman. He delivers ice for a living. And Kristoff, see, he's a loner, and he thinks he doesn't deserve love, or he thinks he doesn't need love. And then there's my favorite character, Olaf. He's a snowman. And the thing about Olaf is he is just looking for a little bit of warmth in a very cold world. And he loses himself all the time, and part of his journey is just finding himself. See, and it's not just about characters who are overcoming conflict, though that makes for a good story in itself, but it's these characters who are on a journey together, and along this journey they're experiencing conflict together, and they're all looking for this sense of saving grace. They're all looking for a sense of home. How many of us can relate to that story? Like, aren't we all on a journey together? And we experience these very real external and internal conflicts. And at times, the world seems like it's just a cold, dark place. What are the things that save us? So we might consider Frozen to be a postmodern parable. And the thing about parables is, parables just have this way of communicating a deep spiritual reality. And here's why I think we can refer to it as a postmodern parable. So think with me for a moment about the more traditional fairy tale, Snow White. In Snow White, you have these very clean, nice, neat categories. There's good and there's bad. There's right and there's wrong. There's good and evil, and you're either on the side of good or evil. There are no complexities with the categories. So you might remember in the story of Snow White, Snow is the good heroine of the story, and the queen is the evil villain in the story. And she casts this external spell on Snow through the poisonous apple. And Snow is very much a very passive recipient in the process. She doesn't know what's going on. She just kind of, this is placed upon her. Now in the story, where is salvation? It's from true love's kiss from a prince. Remember, so the poison from the apple, this curse, it takes life from her. She's lifeless. The prince comes along, gives her a kiss, and in a very real sense, she's brought back to life so that she and the prince can live happily ever after. It's a cute story, but I'm not sure it's a story truly many of us can relate to. And you may be thinking to yourself, this sounds like the story of the Christian categories I grew up with, right? You had sin, which is the evil curse placed upon you by an actual person, a character named Satan, and this evil curse renders you absolutely helpless and hopeless and completely separated from God. And where is salvation in this narrative? Salvation comes from true love's kiss from a prince. And this prince is named Jesus. And Jesus gives up his life sacrificially on the cross so that you could go on and live happily ever after with the prince. Sound familiar? It's a story I grew up with. And I think it's why I love the movie Frozen. Because what Frozen does, Frozen comes along and it throws all of these categories into a huge mess. And in Frozen, it moves way beyond the categories of good and bad, wrong or right, or good or evil. There's complexities here. Remember Elsa. Elsa has this condition. With her hands, she has icy powers. And this condition, it's not a gift or a curse. It's just there. It just is. We don't really have the origins of this condition. We don't know how it got there. It just is. And sometimes Elsa can create something really beautiful with this condition. Like, remember the first scene in the movie, the opening scene, where she's with her sister Anna on that Saturday morning, and Elsa's creating this icy playground for Anna and her to jump on. Now, Elsa can also create havoc and harm with this condition, like the time she freezes the entire town, her hometown, the entire village of Arendelle, and she runs off to be alone. Now let's just pause there for a moment. If Elsa were the praying sort, I've never met Elsa, just so you know, but assuming that Elsa is the praying sort, how many times do you think Elsa prayed to God to take this thing away from her? God, take this thing away from me. I don't know what to do with it. It creates harm. It hurts people that I love. It puts feelings in me I don't always know what to do with. I can't always control this thing. Now, I think it's safe to assume that most of you in this room, in fact, I think it's safe to assume that all of you in this room, you have something. You have something in your life that you have tried to conquer. You've tried to beat, and it just keeps coming up again. You have asked God to take this thing away from you, but it just keeps coming back, and you can't get rid of it. I don't know what your thing is. I have things, plural. What's your thing? Maybe your thing is like judging people, and you realize it after the fact, but you realize it's your first impulse, and you just always judge people. And after you do it, you realize that it actually hurts people, and sometimes it hurts yourself. But you also know that sometimes when you judge people, it serves you well. It serves to your benefit. It's actually helped you make wiser decisions. You see, maybe your thing is like memories of the past. You know that you have really good memories, and then you have these other memories, and they haunt you. And these memories are painful. And you have begged God to take these memories away because every time they come up, they cause so much conflict within you. Or maybe your thing is the drink. Like maybe you'll go home this afternoon, and by the time night falls, you'll be fighting the urge to pick up the drink. And you know that inherently there is nothing wrong with God's good gift of alcohol. But when you consume it, it turns on you. And when you consume it, you create a path of destruction and you hurt people that you love. What are the things that save us? And remember in the film, Elsa, she runs away. And many people consider this the height of the film. Elsa runs away this far-off land. She has just frozen her home village of Arendelle. She runs away and she starts creating something really beautiful, this beautiful castle for her to live in. And then she starts singing, "Let It Go." And it's this beautiful moment where she's letting go of the shame and she's letting go of all the things people have told her to be and how to behave. And many people think of this as the height of the film. In fact, our 2.5-year-old daughter, Shiloh, she does not know this movie by its title, Frozen. She says, "Poppy, I want to watch Let It Go." And she can't pronounce her L, so it comes out as "wet it go." It's a W. And see, many people think this is like the major story turn for Elsa. And I say, kind of. Though she's creating something beautiful, though she's letting go of her shame, she's still doing it in isolation. In a very real sense, she's just created another hell. Because how beautiful can something be when you're just enjoying it alone? What are the things that save us? So then the Apostle Paul comes along. And the Apostle Paul, he's writing to this church in Corinth, a church that he started. And I think he's engaging exactly this question. Like if Paul were sitting with us this morning and we were to say, Paul, what are the things that save us? I think he would answer it this way. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. It is necessary to brag, not that it does any good. I'll move on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who was caught up into the third heaven 14 years ago. By the way, Paul, he is speaking about himself here. He's speaking in the third person because Paul does that sometimes. You may have friends that do this, and it's kind of awkward. But Paul's talking about himself. Paul also comes from the Jewish tradition. So when he's talking about this third level of heaven and this being caught up 14 years ago, he's referring to his conversion experience, and he's doing so using very traditional categories of Jewish mysticism. His audience would have understood this. He understood this. We may not fully understand the language, but he's speaking of a very powerful experience here. And he says, I don't know whether it was in the body or out of the body. God knows. I know that this man was caught up into paradise and that he heard unspeakable words that were things no one is allowed to repeat. I don't know whether it was in the body or apart from the body. God knows. I'll brag about this man, but I won't brag about myself, except to brag about my weaknesses. If I did not want to brag, I wouldn't make a fool of myself because I'd tell the truth. I'm holding back from bragging so that no one will give me any more credit than what anyone sees or hears about me. I was given a thorn in my body because of the outstanding revelations I've received so that I wouldn't be conceited. It's a messenger from Satan sent to torment me so that I wouldn't be conceited. I pleaded with the Lord 3 times for it to leave me alone. He said to me, my grace is enough for you, because power is made perfect in weakness. So I'll gladly spend my time bragging about my weaknesses so that Christ's power can rest on me. Therefore, I'm all right with weaknesses, insults, disasters, harassments, and stressful situations for the sake of Christ, because when I'm weak, then I'm strong. So, Paul has this thing. And we don't know exactly what this thing is. He refers to it as this thorn in his body, a thorn in his flesh. Scholars and commentators have gone into long, heated, drawn-out debates about what this thing is. Some say it was some sort of physical ailment. Some say it was maybe a learning disability. Others say it was one of the churches that he started that was just being a pain in the butt. Paul has this thing, and he cries out to God, God, take this thing away from me. It creates way too much pain in my life. Take this thing away from me. Now notice, for Paul, God doesn't respond with these nice, neat, clean answers. Sure, I'll take it away. Or, no, I'm not going to take it away. You need to be taught a lesson. Or maybe, let's think about it. God says, Paul, my grace is enough for you. Power is made perfect in weakness. You are strong, not when you are strong, but when you are weak. Can you imagine? I mean, I don't know how many times I've read this text and I think, yeah, but Paul, really, what does it mean when you say strong when I'm weak? What does that mean? Because it's not the message I hear. I'm constantly hearing, you're strong when you're strong. You're strong when you're showing others that you can hold it together. You're strong when you can take another step in the face of adversity. This is what it is to be strong, and you're strong when you let others know that you're strong. Paul, what are you talking about here? And can you imagine Paul responding? Yeah. Check it out. It's about the mystery of the cross. And keep in mind, Paul reflected almost his entire ministry on the mystery, what he calls the mystery of the cross. And he would say to us, remember when he was hanging on the cross, and he appears to be this utter failure, but he's actually the Redeemer. Yeah, the mystery of the cross. Remember when he's hanging with his bloodied body, and he appears to be the great loser, but he's actually the winner because he's exposing the Roman Empire. What are the things that save us? So I'll never forget a conversation I had with a friend just a few years ago. We were sitting at his dining room table, and he was telling me the story of his addiction and recovery with alcoholism. And he's telling me that he goes to these AA meetings, and by this time he had been sober for almost 20 years. And I'm thinking to myself, like, man, I just don't get it. Why are you still going to these meetings? You haven't had a drink in 20 years. Like, are you still battling this? And if so, there may be something deeper going on here. Like, there may not be hope for you. And so I just asked him, I said, why do you still go to these meetings? I said, are you scared you're going to take another drink? He said, well, you know the alcoholism, the addiction of alcohol, it's powerful, baffling, and cunning. And the first step tells me that I'm powerless to this addiction. And so, yeah, of course, I don't put myself above that. Of course, I could take another drink. He said, but that's not my real fear. That's not why I go to meetings. He said, I go to meetings because all the time there are new people coming in. And when these new people come in, they are coming in at their very bottom. They don't have hope. They don't know that life is worth it. They are coming in just barely hanging on. He says, they need me. Those new people, you see, they need my story. They need my experiences of strength and hope. They need to hear that it gets better than it is right now. They need to hear there's a way out of the chaos, that life doesn't have to stay this way. And I remember thinking, wow, this is profound. He's taking this thing, this so-called weakness, 20 years later, and he's using it to give new life to people who are desperate for new life. And you see, my mom tells me the same thing with Compassionate Friends, the support group. That's an international support group for families and parents who've experienced the loss of a child. And she says that still, even 20 years later, some of these parents are coming to Compassionate Friends. Why? Is it because they're just so stuck in their grief, and they've been stuck for 20 years and they really need help? No, not really. I mean, maybe they need a little lift sometimes. But she says they come because on any given day, there's a new mom or a new dad walking through the door who has just lost their son or daughter, and they have very little hope. They're not sure life is worth it. When they come in, they're barely hanging on, and they need the stories of people who have been through it. They need to hear the voice, the experience that says life gets better. You can't imagine it right now, but at some point, the clouds actually do part. It doesn't stay this intense. And you know, it gets me to thinking, what if we church people, and I'm talking big church here, capital C, the Christian movement, what if we church people started re-examining the reasons as to why we participate in the Christian community, the reasons as to why we come to church on Sunday mornings? Like, of course, you need to come to be lifted up sometimes. I get that. I do too. But what if it wasn't all about you? What if it wasn't all about me? Like, what if it wasn't about, when I come to church on Sundays, I need this hymn and I need this hymn. And then, the music, it's not contemporary enough or it's not traditional enough. And I like that 3-point sermon. And last week, Pastor gave a 4-point sermon. It really threw me off my game. And I need the benediction at this place and in this way. And don't get me started on the color of the carpet. Like, what if we said, no, that's not why we come to church. Like, I come because there's actual people. And there's people in the community, this community, and outside the community who are coming in and they're at their bottom or they're barely hanging on. And they need my story. Oh, it sounds so arrogant, doesn't it? They need my story. Yeah, they need my story, and they need your story. They need the story that I've encountered God's grace. So many of them have been told, oh, they're not really wanted by God, or they're a huge disappointment to God, or grace really isn't enough for them. They've kind of surpassed that level. Do you know how powerful it is to tell people, to remind people that God's grace is enough for you? God's grace is enough. You are a child of God. It is a message that never gets old. It never loses its value. What if we changed our perspective of why we come to church? What are the things that save us? And then Paul talks about the greatest Christian complex, the greatest paradox. You are strong, not when you are strong, but you are strong when you are weak. So allow me to close with this story. A friend of mine came into my office just recently. He did not tell me that he was coming. He just showed up. And I happened to be there on that afternoon. And he walks into my office and he sits on the couch and he says, man, I really need to talk. And he said it in such a way that I knew he needed to talk then. It wasn't like, hey, we'll schedule some coffee later or schedule lunch later this week. No, I need to talk now. And he goes on to share with me that he wanted to share with me some things that happened when he was 14 years old. And he says, I've held this stuff in for years. I've only told one other person. It was a friend of mine just a couple of days ago. And he goes on to share with me the things that happened when he was 14 years old. A heart-wrenching story filled with details about how he was sexually abused by an adult that he trusted. And as he's telling me the story, it's feeling like I'm being punched in the gut. And I think the story is over. And he says, I'll be danged if the same thing didn't happen again later that same year with a different adult, in a different state, in a completely different circumstance. Like your heart just sinks. And he's telling me the story like these things happened yesterday. Why? Because he has held this stuff in for years. Not just 2 or 3 years. Not just 2 or 3 decades. He kept this a secret. He didn't tell a soul for 40 years. And he said, it's affecting me. It's affecting my relationship with people and the world around me. He says, I didn't tell anyone because I wanted to prove to myself and to my friends and family, my colleagues, that I was strong, that things could happen to me in life, and I didn't have to get them out. I could just take another step in the face of adversity, and these things, they don't have to affect me. I can just keep going on. And when he's telling me this story, he also tells it in such a way with a great sense of freedom because you could almost touch it. He was getting something out in order for something new to come in. And I talked to him last week on the phone. And you know what one of his greatest life goals is now? To help other people who've experienced sexual abuse. You see, on that afternoon, when we cried together, and we hugged one another, and we prayed together, I better understood in that moment what it meant to be strong, not when you are strong, but when you are weak. And brothers and sisters, you are strong when you are weak. Power is made perfect in weakness. You are strong when you are weak, and God's grace is always enough for you, and it's always enough for me. Are these the things that save us? So at the end of the film, Elsa finally realizes that Arendelle needs her. Her hometown needs her story. They need her condition. They need her weaknesses. And so she goes back to Arendelle, and she actually creates something beautiful. It's the last scene of the film. Take a look.